By the way, don't you feel embarrassed leeching off Dad? If you get divorced, your life is over.
What? I instinctively asked again.
Being a stay-at-home life and not even doing housework? Seriously, you wouldn't even have a right to complain if you got dumped. And now with that injury, it's basically game over for you, isn't it?
For real.
It was the first family gathering in a long time. After injuring myself and stopping by the hospital before joining everyone, my son Sean and my husband Mark mocked me, bursting into laughter. Even though some relatives, clearly unable to stand it, tried to step in and scold them, Sean smugly responded, "All right, fine, I guess we should stop for now," still under the delusion that he had the upper hand. Smiling sweetly at Sean, I turned to him and Mark, then spoke. "It's totally fine. Well then, I'll get a divorce."
What? Divorce?
Sean looked completely dumbfounded, unable to process the unexpected response.
All right, both of you calm down. Don't get so worked up, Emma.
Why was Sean acting so detached, as if this wasn't about him? The divorce wasn't with Sean, it was with Mark. Remaining perfectly composed, I reached into my bag and pulled out a letter. "My name is Emma Coleman. I'm a 45-year-old stay-at-home mom. My husband, Mark, is 49 and works as a corporate manager at a company conveniently close to home. He's currently a department head and works hard to provide for our family. I've been supporting Mark by managing the household and raising our kids. We have 2 children. Sean, our 17-year-old son, is preparing for college entrance exams, and our daughter, Hannah, just started high school at 16. We're an ordinary family of 4. But for many years, I've had a deep, lingering worry. The issue was Sean. Sean had been a difficult child to raise, prone to severe tantrums since he was little. But it was my first time raising a child. I thought that's just how it was, so I did my best, no matter how much he kept me on my toes. When Hannah was born, I was shocked at how much easier it was to care for a girl. As Sean grew older, his tantrums began to subside, but a new problem arose. Around middle school, when Sean entered adolescence, he started to treat Hannah and me with disrespect.
"Hannah hid my textbook."
"I didn't. I don't know anything about it."
This might have been when he was in the 8th grade. They had a huge fight over it. "Did you even look properly? Hannah wouldn't have any reason to do something like that."
There you go again, taking Hannah's side.
It's not about taking sides. Sean would yell to intimidate Hannah and me, deliberately slamming his fists into walls and desks to make loud noises. Hannah began to feel scared of Sean.
"I really don't know. I haven't touched any of your stuff."
Hannah pleaded desperately, her voice trembling with tears as I tried to shield her. I told Sean again to search properly. But even after that, he yelled, "I already told you it's not there," and loud crashing sounds came from his room as he threw a fit. There was no way I could physically overpower a middle school boy anymore. For now, he was only taking his anger out on objects, but if he ever turned that aggression toward Hannah or me, it would be disastrous. That night, I talked to Mark about it.
Well, it's just a phase.
But he muttered after hearing me out. "Don't brush it off with that one phrase. This is something we, as parents, need to address seriously."
Well, there's nothing I can do about it. Work keeps me busy. Isn't this exactly why you're a stay-at-home mom?
I was dumbfounded. Was he really saying that just because I was a stay-at-home mom, I should handle everything with the kids on my own? In the end, Mark didn't say a word to Sean. For a while after that, Sean ignored both Hannah and me. Still, it must have been inconvenient for him to go without his textbook. Knowing full well that he might lash out again, I decided to approach him. "Did you find your textbook? If it's still missing, maybe we should talk to your teacher about it." Sean glared at me. "I'm talking to you. Say something."
Yeah, I found it.
"You found it? Where was it?" I asked in surprise.
At school.
Sean answered curtly. His blunt, unapologetic tone instantly struck a nerve. "So it was just a misunderstanding on your part, Sean. You blamed Hannah so much. Did you properly apologize to her?"
Can you stop nagging already?
"It's not about nagging, Sean." In the end, no matter how many times I told him, Sean never apologized to Hannah. On the contrary, every time I brought it up, Sean's attitude grew worse.
It's fine. Just let it go.
Hannah finally said, and reluctantly, I stopped scolding Sean. The last thing I wanted was for my arguments with Sean to escalate and put Hannah in harm's way. I knew Mark needed to step in and firmly address this. But when I talked to him, he was, as always, no help at all.
Hannah said she's okay with letting it go, didn't she? Why not just drop it?
That's not the point.
Maybe it's your nagging that's getting on Sean's nerves in the first place.
Mark muttered this dismissively, clearly annoyed, and that was the end of the conversation. For now, Sean didn't show any defiant behavior toward Mark. That's exactly why I needed Mark to step in. But if he wasn't willing to address the issue, there was nothing I could do. I convinced myself that Sean's rebellious phase would eventually pass, trying to comfort myself with that thought. But I was being naive. While what could be called his rebellious phase seemed to have settled down for the time being, Sean became hooked on the internet after finishing his high school entrance exams. He became poisoned by social media and started to be negatively influenced. Among other things, his comments reflecting disdain toward women noticeably increased.
Women only exist for the sake of men.
One day, during a fight with Hannah, Sean blurted out those words at her. "What are you even talking about?"
Because it's true, isn't it? Everyone says so on social media.
At 16, Sean probably found such ideas exciting, even if he knew deep down they were wrong. He seemed to have the mistaken impression that looking at people through such a biased lens made him seem cool. Not everyone thinks that way. If you can't properly discern the truth and make it your own, you shouldn't be using social media. If you don't change that mindset, I'll cancel your phone plan. I firmly reprimanded Sean. Sean briefly frowned in dissatisfaction before quickly smirking.
What? It's Dad's money, isn't it? You don't have the right to say that.
Sean's defiant remark made it clear he wasn't willing to accept anything I said. I thought it might be useless to rely on Mark, but I decided to consult him anyway. Sean wasn't going to listen to anything I said, especially since he clearly didn't take me seriously. That's why I wanted Mark to step in and guide Sean onto the right path. However, Mark burst out laughing after hearing me out.
So Sean started saying things like that too.
This isn't a laughing matter. Just thinking about what he might grow up to be terrifies me.
But doesn't Sean have a point? Women can't really do anything without men, can they?
I was utterly stunned. I couldn't believe Mark shared the same mindset. At that moment, I truly realized I could no longer rely on him. At the same time, I began to worry about the future for both Hannah and myself. For now, Mark still had his job. But once he retired, he might treat Hannah and me like pawns to be used however he pleased. That thought filled me with unease. In the end, Sean continued to spend every day on social media, making the same derogatory comments about women. No matter what I said, it was useless. Desperate to get him off social media, I once tried cutting off the internet connection on his phone. But then he took Hannah's phone by force and started using it as if it were his own.
Mom, do something about Sean.
Almost every day, Sean would use his strength to snatch Hannah's phone and use it however he wanted. Not only that, he even logged into her social media accounts, invading her privacy. If you really need to look something up, use mine instead of Hannah's. Reluctantly, I handed over my own phone.
What? This old model? I don't even know how to use it.
But Sean continued to use Hannah's phone. In the end, to protect Hannah, I reactivated the internet on Sean's phone. Even after that, I couldn't find a better solution, and to this day, Sean spends all his free time scrolling through social media. Now that he's 18, he seems to have realized that saying such things in public would be unacceptable, and he no longer uses extreme words to hurt Hannah or me. However, I once caught a glimpse of his phone screen and saw that he was still browsing pages filled with derogatory comments about women. Over the past 3 years, I've consulted Mark about this issue countless times. At first, Mark would laugh it off, but over time, his expression began to show annoyance. Recently, the mere mention of "it's about Sean" was enough for him to respond with, "Not this again."
I've been really busy with work lately. Let's talk another time.
I wanted to believe him, but even when I tried to bring it up on a different day, I never managed to have the conversation. To be fair, he had been coming home late recently. I felt guilty about pushing the issue, but I desperately needed his help to address something I couldn't solve on my own. Yet, I couldn't even rely on him for that. One day, there was an opportunity for Mark's siblings and their families to gather. It wasn't for any special occasion, just an invitation to have a meal together for a change. Both my parents and Mark's parents have already passed away. Without opportunities like this, we wouldn't have a chance to gather with relatives, so I was really looking forward to it. But the day before, I had an unfortunate accident. I missed a step on the stairs and fell. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but by the next day, my foot was swollen and the pain only kept getting worse. I didn't necessarily want anyone to worry about me, but the only one who showed any concern was Hannah. "I'm sorry, but I'll head to the hospital first before joining you all. You can go ahead without me."
I'll go with you to the hospital. It'll be hard for you to get around alone, right?
"That would be a big help. Thank you, sweetie." Mark and Sean, on the other hand, sneered at our exchange and dismissively said, "All right, we'll head there first," showing no warmth at all. As I watched Mark and Sean head off to the restaurant ahead of us and started preparing to go to the hospital, a letter unexpectedly arrived. It appeared to be express mail.
It's addressed to you, Mom.
Hannah took the letter from the postal worker and handed it to me. I didn't recognize the sender's name. I couldn't imagine why it would be sent via express mail, so I hurriedly opened the envelope. After reading the letter, I immediately went to the hospital for an examination. It turned out to be just a sprain, but the symptoms were severe enough that I was advised to use crutches.
What do you think? Should we just head home and let you rest?
Hannah, being considerate, asked me gently. "Thank you, but I should at least show my face."
All right,
she replied, though her tone made it clear she wasn't entirely convinced. I smiled at her and said softly, "It's okay." Once we finished at the hospital and arrived at the restaurant, The gathering was already underway.
Finally,
Sean exclaimed when he noticed us, pointing at me leaning on my crutches and laughing.
you're such an idiot.
In stark contrast, the gathered relatives all turned to us with wide eyes.
Are you all right? That must have been tough.
Why don't you leave your crutches here? Hold on to me.
Mark's older sister, Betty, and his younger sister, Mary, immediately rushed over to support Hannah and me. The contrast between them and a certain someone smirking arrogantly while staying seated couldn't have been more striking. Thank you. Hannah's helping me, so I'll be all right. Sorry for troubling you, I said, apologizing to both of them. With Hannah's assistance, I finally managed to sit down.
Was it a fracture?
Mark asked, directing the question at me. No, it's just a bad sprain, though it seems a little severe.
You're so clumsy. Make sure you still do the housework properly. You're a stay-at-home mom, after all.
Hey, you don't have to say it like that.
As usual, Mark didn't express a single word of concern, instead making the joke at my expense. Even though Hannah was visibly upset and tried to speak up for me, I stopped her. Sean, watching this unfold, decided to chime in.
By the way, aren't you embarrassed to be leeching off Dad? If you get divorced, your life is over.
What? I couldn't help but ask, startled.
Being a stay-at-home mom who can't even do housework? Seriously, you wouldn't have the right to complain if you got dumped. And now with that injury? It's basically game over for you, isn't it?
For real.
For some reason, the two of them burst into laughter, finding it hilariously funny.
Mark, Sean, how could you say such things?
Betty and Mary tried to defend me, but neither Sean nor Mark took their words seriously. Sean was one thing, but Mark, likely influenced by the alcohol he consumed, didn't even notice that not only his sisters but their families were clearly uncomfortable with his behavior. Hannah, sitting beside me, was trembling with anger. I was too. But I couldn't afford to lose my temper at the two of them in a setting like this.
All right, guess we'll stop here for now.
Sean said, still under the delusion that he was in control, throwing me a pitying look. But I gave Sean a sweet smile and then turned to both Mark and Sean before opening my mouth to speak. It's totally fine. Well then, I'll get a divorce.
What? Divorce?
However, Sean was taken aback, completely dumbfounded by the unexpected response. What? You're the one who brought it up, aren't you? Or do you not actually want me to divorce? Having your mom around must still be convenient, right? I kept my smile intact, speaking in a deliberately provocative tone.
Like I even need a mom like you.
Sean shot back, his face turning bright red as expected. It was Mark who spoke up next.
All right, both of you calm down. Emma, don't get so worked up.
Why was he acting so detached, as though this had nothing to do with him? The divorce wasn't with Sean, it was with Mark. Was he trying to mediate our argument and pretend he hadn't just agreed with Sean's earlier insults toward me? Turning my gaze to Mark, I addressed him calmly and clearly. I'm not angry at all, but since this is a good opportunity, let's just end things here.
What?
Let's be home. You've never cared about this family or me at all. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter that had arrived via express mail earlier, placing it on the table. Mark, along with everyone else, watched my actions intently, their eyes fixed on the letter I had just put down.
What's that?
Mark shifted his gaze from the letter back to me and muttered quietly. It's from your girlfriend. She sent me a letter asking me to divorce you as soon as possible. If you have a girlfriend, you could have just told me, you know. My answer froze not only Mark, but the entire room, silencing everyone present. Sean's forced smile twitched awkwardly, and like a robot, he slowly turned to look at Mark.
What? This is a joke, right? Dad?
Well,
Mark was visibly shaken. To be honest, there was always the possibility that this letter could have been a prank. However, judging by his reaction, it was clear he had something in mind, something that hit too close to home. The pale color of his face and the cold sweat on his brow were enough to confirm that this letter wasn't just a joke. I sighed. Something comes to mind, doesn't it?
no, that's not it.
Oh my, making excuses already before we've even confirmed the facts. Under the judgmental stares of everyone around him, Mark seemed to shrink smaller and smaller. I couldn't help but let out a derisive laugh. Hearing me, Mark's face twisted in frustration and his eyebrows shot up in anger.
I don't know. A girlfriend? Me? How dare you accuse me with a letter from who knows who and make a fool out of me like this?
I was exasperated. Now he was trying to feign ignorance.
Did it even really say that? You must have made it up. It's obviously your fabrication.
Yeah, that's right. Isn't it pathetic to resort to lying just because you can't win the argument?
Sean chimed in, siding with Mark.
Well, to be fair, I can't imagine Mark actually cheating.
There's no way he'd do something like that. Maybe it's just Emma's misunderstanding?
While Mark's sisters, Betty and Mary, were frozen in shock, their husbands had started defending him, despite the evidence sitting right in front of them. Frustrated, I glared silently at Mark, but he avoided my gaze, looking away as if to escape.
I'm glad you both trust me. Let's just pour another drink and keep going.
Mark started pouring drinks for the two men who had come to his defense. Even though his expression clearly betrayed his panic, I wondered if there was really nothing more I could do. And that's when it happened. Bang! Hannah slammed her hand down on the table, making a loud noise. The letter sitting on the table shook, and then she grabbed it firmly and stood up. Hannah? In the room that had fallen silent once again, Hannah opened the letter and, to everyone's surprise, began reading it aloud.
To Mr. Mark's wife.
Mark's face twisted in shock and fear.
My name is Emily Carter, and I am Mark's girlfriend. We met at work and started dating, recently celebrating our 1-year anniversary on my birthday.
Well,
At that time, Mark officially proposed to me. However, I've heard that you're refusing to divorce him. When will you let him go? I'm sending you this letter because I want you to separate from him as soon as possible.
Hannah's hands trembled with rage as she continued to read the letter aloud. What kind of terrible parent lets their daughter read something like this? But overwhelmed by anger and sadness, I couldn't hold back my tears. I simply hung my head, sniffling quietly.
Let me be clear. Your family is a hindrance. Stop tormenting Mark and divorce him already. Mark and I love each other. Please don't interfere with our love anymore.
Finishing the letter, Hannah marched straight to Mark, holding it out to him with shaking hands.
Well, are you still going to deny it? Did you even think about how Mom would feel reading this?
Realizing he couldn't escape the truth any longer, Mark went pale and fell into silence. Even the two who had defended Mark earlier were now completely silent, as if attending a funeral.
It's just a prank.
Sean tried to defend Mark once more, but Hannah glared at him fiercely.
Prank or not, the fact remains that both of you humiliated Mom here today.
That wasn't what I meant.
I don't need a family as rotten as this. Just like you said earlier, Sean, Mom and Dad should get divorced.
Hannah pleaded through her tears. There was no one left to defend Mark or Sean now. Realizing it wasn't the time for me to cry either, I stood up and walked over to Hannah, wrapping my arms around her shoulders. Hannah, I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Mom.
I'm taking Hannah with me. We'll have a proper discussion later. I said this to Mark firmly.
Wait a second.
Mark was at a loss for words, but Sean tried to stop us instead. However, when Hannah and I shot him sharp glares, he shrank back, unable to say anything.
Let's go, Mom.
I nodded at Hannah's words and left the scene with her. Soon after, I received an apology call from Betty. Although I also apologized for ruining what should have been a pleasant gathering, she reassured me, "Don't worry about it." Mary seemed to feel the same as Betty. Despite being Mark's blood relatives, neither of them blamed me at all. On the contrary, Betty sighed and said, "Mark has always looked down on us. I thought he treated you differently, but hearing him speak to you like that, it's just shocking." Distracted by Sean's behavior, I hadn't realized it before, but Mark must have always had a tendency to demean women. After Hannah and I left, Betty and Mary apparently scolded Mark, Sean, and even their husbands. While I felt a little sorry for dragging their husbands into it, I couldn't deny they deserved a reprimand.
I told them to apologize to you and Hannah, no matter what. Let me know if anything else happens, okay?
Thank you so much. I expressed my gratitude to Betty and ended the call. A few minutes later, the front door opened.
We're home.
I heard the voice, but neither Hannah nor I responded. Looking visibly uncomfortable, Mark and Sean entered the living room.
Hey.
Sean muttered, cautiously gauging my mood.
Hey. Isn't there something else you should be saying?
Hannah spoke to Sean in a confrontational tone, but for once, Sean didn't complain or argue back like he usually would. Mark stayed silent, saying nothing as he watched the exchange between the two. Just so we're clear, the divorce wasn't a joke. Reluctantly, I decided to speak up myself. At my words, their faces stiffened in shock, and they immediately bowed their heads on the spot.
Dad.
Emma, I'm truly sorry. It was just a moment of weakness.
Or what? So you admit to the affair? I pressed him in a firm tone. Mark hesitated for a moment, his lips pressed tightly together, before slowly nodding.
Disgusting.
Hannah exclaimed, covering her mouth as she stormed out of the living room. Even I felt an overwhelming sense of disgust. It's only natural to feel disgusted knowing your father is having an affair. Mark wore a wounded expression, but he had no right to look like that, not even a shred. What surprised me more, however, was what Sean did next. Sean dropped to his knees, grabbing Mark by the collar and shouting furiously, "Why? Why would you cheat? Are you trying to destroy our family?"
Can't breathe.
Mark struggled to free himself from Sean's grip, but there was no way he could overpower the strength of a high school boy. Since Sean wasn't actually choking him, I made no move to stop him.
Emma, help me.
However, Mark deliberately pretended to be in pain as he turned to me for help. To Mark, I said firmly, "When I came to you countless times asking for help with Sean, did you ever lift a finger to help me? And why do you think you're the only one who deserves to be helped?" Mark stopped resisting at my words. Sean, who had momentarily let his anger take over, also seemed to lose his strength and released his grip on Mark, letting him go.
This guy isn't worth it. He's no father of mine.
Sean said as he slumped onto the living room sofa. Now abandoned even by Sean, Mark sat silently, utterly defeated. After about a minute of silence, Mark seemed to decide that seeking my forgiveness was the quickest way to resolve everything. Swallowing his pride, he knelt before me once again. Then he slowly bowed his head.
Emma, I swear to turn over a new leaf. I'll become a better father to Sean and Hannah. Just forgive me this once.
As I exhaled, Mark lifted his head. For some reason, he seemed to assume he had been forgiven, and his expression brightened. That overly optimistic face disgusted me, and I couldn't help but grimace. Turning to Sean, I asked, "Sean, what do you think I should do?" Sean hesitated for a moment. He clearly harbored feelings of disgust toward Mark. But after a few seconds of contemplation, he looked at me and said,
Well, Dad seems sorry. If you forgive him, then I'm okay with it.
Hearing those words, I couldn't help but laugh. Sean and Mark really were two of a kind. After hearing that, how could you think you've truly apologized?
What?
Both of them looked genuinely puzzled. Sean, you might sound like you're finally defending me now, but you and Mark are the same.
You're saying I'm the same as someone who cheats like him?
Yes, because you both actually think what Mark just said qualifies as an apology. Sean looked genuinely confused, pausing for a moment to process my words. Listen carefully. Someone who is truly remorseful doesn't say, "Forgive me." At my words, realization dawned on both Mark and Sean, their faces stiffening. When you're sincerely sorry, you don't speak in a commanding tone like that. It's supposed to be, "Please forgive me." How can I possibly trust someone claiming to turn over a new leaf with such a half-hearted apology? Mark fell silent, unable to say a word. The truth was he lacked the capacity to humble himself toward me, which was why he spoke the way he did. Even now, he couldn't completely let go of his condescending attitude toward me. It was evident in his tone. Sean, too, had failed to notice this, making him no different. I'm not asking for gratitude, but we're family. I don't want to be treated like a fool.
I wasn't mocking you, I just didn't realize.
You weren't? Can you really say that with confidence? Neither of them had anything left to say. Even Sean, who had been so assertive toward Mark earlier, turned pale. As I said earlier in front of everyone, I'm taking Hannah with me. I refuse to live a life where I'm constantly belittled.
Wait, no. I need you too, Mom.
I'm sorry, but considering how you've treated Hannah and your attitude toward me, I just can't live with you anymore. Sean looked at me with tearful eyes, desperately clinging to me, but I pushed him away. To be honest, if it were only about your father's affair, I might have endured it and tried to rebuild our family. But to mock me like that in front of everyone, you're just like him. It's better for both of us if we separate.
No.
Sean, who had belittled me for so many years, was now staring at me with red, tear-filled eyes. I felt a slight pang of guilt, but when I thought of Hannah, I knew I couldn't take Sean with me.
I only made one mistake. And I'm still a minor, right? You're my mom, you should forgive me.
Sean yelled through his tears. After everything I had just explained, how could he still choose to respond like that? It was nothing short of disappointing. Didn't I just tell you? If you're truly sorry, you'd be saying, "Please forgive me."
Oh.
Sean's face froze in realization before he fell silent. I addressed both of them again. This is the result of your actions, your responsibility to bear. Both Mark and Sean, perhaps finally regretting their actions after hearing my words, began sobbing uncontrollably, tears streaming down their faces. If anyone had the right to cry, it was me. Yet even in the end, they acted like the victims. Disgusted, I left them behind and went to comfort Hannah, stepping out of the living room. For the next week, both Mark and Sean were unusually quiet. Had they given up on trying to stop me? Interpreting their silence that way, I waited until exactly 1 week after the incident and, that evening, handed the divorce papers to Mark. I'll be submitting this tomorrow. Go ahead and fill it out now. But both Mark and Sean quickly spoke up, almost in unison.
Come on, calm down. Think this over one more time.
Yeah, Mom. You can't work right away with your foot like that, and there's no way you can raise Hannah on your own. Let's just keep things the way they are. Dad, sorry, after all.
What was the point of trying to argue now? In the end, Mark refused to fill out the divorce papers, no matter how many times I asked. Even the following morning, he resisted. I need it submitted today. Just sign it already.
We'll talk when I get home. I'm heading to work for now.
Taking advantage of my injured foot, Mark fled to work as if trying to escape. But I wasn't about to let him keep running away forever. That very day, I decided to take action. With Sean and Hannah off at school, I found myself alone and decided to visit someone. I was certain that she would take my side and support me in pushing for my divorce from Mark. When I arrived at my destination, I approached someone nearby who appeared to be an employee. My name is Emma Coleman, wife of Mark Coleman. Is Emily Carter available?
Oh, Mrs. Coleman, the wife of Manager Coleman. It's a pleasure to meet you. Emily Carter, you say? Please wait a moment.
The employee said that and immediately began contacting someone. Yes, I had come to Mark's workplace to meet with Emily Carter, his mistress.
Emma, why are you here?
While waiting for Emily to be called, Mark suddenly appeared, rushing toward me in a panic. I wasn't sure if the employee who took my name informed Mark, or if someone who recognized me alerted him, but I hadn't come to see him today. I have business here, I replied coldly.
Business? What kind of?
Just as Mark was questioning me.
Mark. Oh, I mean Manager Coleman.
A woman appeared, clearly about to call out Mark's name.
What? Carter.
Mark was visibly shaken, almost amusingly so. Ignoring him completely, I turned to her, bowed my head, and said, I'm Emma Coleman, Mark's wife. I've read your letter. At my words, Emily's lips curled into a smirk. Mark, now pale as a sheet, desperately tried to make me leave, shouting, just go home already. But with my injured foot, he couldn't forcibly drag me out, and I stayed firmly in place. Taking a slow, deep breath, I addressed Emily. I had no idea that you and my husband, Mark, were so deeply in love. My apologies for unknowingly getting in the way of your relationship.
Hey!
Mark shouted, his voice trembling with panic. It was no wonder Mark was panicking. There were plenty of employees around, all of them hearing every word I said. As Emily suggested, I intended to proceed with a divorce, but my husband has been unwilling to comply. I've come to seek advice on how to handle this matter.
Enough!
The employees around us began whispering to each other, and I could even hear the sound of a smartphone starting to record from somewhere nearby. Realizing this, Mark shouted at the onlookers, "This isn't a show. Stop staring." But his words carried no weight. I continued speaking unfazed. "Please, Emily, tell Mark to agree to the divorce." Emily had been silently listening to me, but when I glanced at her face, it was as pale as a ghost. Clearly, she hadn't anticipated me coming to the company, exposing their affair publicly, or that Mark would refuse the divorce. Her expression was a mixture of shock and panic, and I had to stifle a laugh.
Enough already. Do you even understand that this is my workplace? Just leave.
Mark, speaking forcefully, grabbed my shoulder and gave it a sharp pull. Because of my injured foot and being caught off guard, I ended up falling to the floor.
Are you all right?
Several employees rushed over in a panic to help me. Though my fall was partly due to my own carelessness, Mark immediately knelt beside me, clearly alarmed. However, Emily didn't take kindly to this scene.
What the hell? Mark, just leave that old lady alone.
What?
And what's this about? You're hesitating to divorce her? What's going on, Mark?
It seemed Emily had reached her breaking point, and despite everyone watching, she began angrily confronting Mark. With the help of the employees, I managed to stand up, grab my crutches, and turn to Mark. "Take your time and have a good talk with her. I'll be waiting at home for you to finally sign the divorce papers today." Mark turned bright red and looked down, unable to meet my gaze. Meanwhile, Emily stepped closer to him, clutching his suit jacket, and demanded, "Mark, you're divorcing her, right?" Leaving them to their drama, I turned my back on them and walked out of the office. If Mark had admitted his wrongdoing and shown me genuine sincerity, things wouldn't have had to go this far. But now, I hoped he would reflect on how his own actions had brought him to this point. That night, Mark finally signed the divorce papers. Perhaps he realized that dragging it out any longer could lead to even worse consequences. He also agreed, without resistance, to discussions about asset division, alimony, and child support, paving the way for a divorce that I could accept. Naturally, I also filed a claim for damages against Emily. Emily seemed to genuinely love Mark, as she arrogantly declared, "If he divorces you, I'll gladly pay the alimony." Though I had many thoughts about her attitude, she was still only 30 years old. Despite being an adult, it was clear she lacked perspective. I chuckled to myself and let her comments slide. Then, 3 days after I received the alimony payment from Emily, the inevitable happened. Both Emily and Mark were formally issued a disciplinary notice of dismissal from their company. Their affair had come to light, and rumors spread that Mark's actions, especially causing me to fall, might have been part of a pattern of abuse. Naturally, I had anticipated this outcome. Emily paid the alimony only to end up with an unemployed older man. It seems this reality finally hit her, and the two of them ultimately broke up. Mark, now left without a family, a job, money, or even his mistress, lost everything. The poetic justice dealt to them felt like something out of a comic book, and I couldn't help but find it hilariously satisfying. Sean turned 18 and planned to live with Mark until he graduated from high school, after which he intended to live on his own. Since Mark was paying me alimony and child support for Hannah, he didn't have the financial means to send money to Sean. As a result, Sean gave up on attending college and had to find a job instead. I felt a little responsible, thinking I had ruined Sean's life, but Hannah's words reassured me. "You didn't ruin it, Mom. This is just how Sean's life turned out. You don't need to feel responsible for it." Her words helped me feel much better. Honestly, I didn't care about Emily or Mark, but I hoped that Sean would reflect on himself and find happiness as he moved forward in life. After the divorce, Hannah and I moved out and started living together in an apartment. Every day, free from worrying about anyone else, felt genuinely enjoyable. Sean and Mark had said it was reckless for a stay-at-home mom like me to divorce and take custody of Hannah. However, what they didn't know was that I had invested all the inheritance my parents left me. The apartment we moved into was actually part of my real estate investments, so I didn't have to pay rent. On top of that, I had child support and alimony. Honestly, money wasn't an issue, and even Hannah's college tuition wouldn't be a problem.
You're so strong. Mark really lost a wonderful wife. He'll learn the hard way for treating women like that.
Mark and Sean were shocked to learn I had assets, but both Betty and Mary supported my new beginning with smiles. I was truly grateful. My foot had healed quite a bit. Once it was fully recovered, I was thinking about taking a trip with Hannah, just the two of us.